I'm here on the job site with Dale, who's a framing contractor.
Hey, good morning.
Dale traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for all his business vehicles. We're here where he needs us most.
Yep, they sure are.
We make it easy for him to save on all his insurance needs, all in one place, with coverage that fits his business and bottom line. Oh, I shouldn't have looked down.
It's all right.
We're so far up here.
Look at me. Take a deep breath.
No, I'm good. So good.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.
Yay Media Group.
All right, y'all, we've got your sleep questions that are going straight to sleep researcher Dr. Erin Hanlon. So we're talking about cortisol. Is that wee hours of the morning spike really a thing? What about supplements, magnesium, THC, CBD, melatonin? What's worth taking and what are some of the cautions to know about, and what to do if you find yourself wide awake in the middle of the night? So we've got all of this and more coming up on this week's episode of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. Welcome to this week's episode of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. I'm registered dietitian Molly Kimball. Today, we are doing something a little bit different with one of our all-time favorite interviews, sleep researcher Dr. Erin Hanlon. She's a research associate professor from the University of Chicago. So she and I have done, I didn't realize it until I asked her to join us for this one. We've done 4 podcasts on sleep. And this one is going to be your questions, your kind of rapid fire, real life questions that y'all have asked me either in person or by email or through social. And so we wanted to kind of hit this rapid fire Q&A. We've also done really deep dives on so many aspects of sleep that are really the foundation of good sleep. So talking about how sleep is so integral in our whole body well-being, looking at it on equal footing with nutrition, with movement. Sleep is right there. And Dr. Hanlon has spent a lot of time explaining, teaching us how sleep or lack of sleep affects our cravings. It affects our weight. It affects how many calories we're burning, how many extra calories we're eating, the types and the types of foods that we're reaching for when we're sleep deprived. So looking at all of these things of how is sleep related to, not just how we're feeling or that we're a little bit moody, but that sleep is just directly related to cravings, weight, our ability, how easy it is or how hard it is to lose extra body fat. All of this stuff is so intricately tied with our sleep. So we've talked a lot about that. In fact, the very first one we did was 2-parter. And it was back in 2020. And I would say I still use that content, that data that she shared all the time. So I would encourage you, if you're looking for that foundation, go back. I'm going to link to these in our show notes, our sleep and cravings with Dr. Hanlon, part 1 and part 2. A couple of years later, she joined us for one on daylight savings time. So I'm going to link to that, especially because as this episode is dropping, daylight savings time is right around the corner. So we're going to have that time change happening in just a couple of days as this is dropping. And so the topic that she and I talked about is daylight savings time. Daylight savings time, should it stay or should it go? I think it should go, personally, spoiler alert. But we talk a lot about what the ramifications are for kind of that flip-flopping of time and how our body is processing it. And then we talked about the science of sleep through the ages. So at different periods of our life, what are some of the different things that can interfere with sleep? What are some of the strategies to help with that? So we have done deep dive. This episode is your quick rapid fire Q&A. So we're going to be talking about things like Do cortisol levels really spike in the wee hours of the morning? Is that what's waking us up at 3 o'clock in the morning? And if so, what do we do about it? What about supplements like THC or CBD? Do they really help our sleep, or could they actually backfire? Things like magnesium, melatonin. When is it worth it? Should we try it? What are the other considerations that maybe we're not even aware of if we're looking at some of these supplements? And what do we do in that middle of the night window when our brains just aren't turning off? So we'll give y'all a refresher on why sleep does belong in that equal footing with nutrition and exercise. And then we are diving straight into your most asked questions. So with that, let's get into it. Welcome, Dr. Hanlon. Thank you for joining me for what I believe is our 5th episode together.
Awesome. Thanks for having me again. I always love chatting with you.
So for our listeners who haven't yet listened to some of our other episodes, which I'll link to for some of the deeper dive there, give us just a little summary of your experience, your expertise, background, and kind of the research that you're working on and what all you've got happening.
Yeah. So I am trained as a neuroscientist. So my PhD is in neuroscience. I study sleep and circadian rhythms and how they relate to different disease states and just normal physiology. Some of the disease states I study in particular include obesity and diabetes. I'm mostly interested as a neuroscientist in how sleep and circadian rhythms might impact food choice and food preference. So the interplay between sleep and not getting enough sleep and how that might contribute to weight gain, how sleep and not enough sleep might contribute to diabetes. And so that's the main thing I study or am interested in. But I study sleep and circadian rhythms in regards to adrenal insufficiency, which is a specific disorder. I've recently started studying the kidney with a nephrologist here at the University of Chicago, and how lack of sleep can contribute to kidney disease.
Wow.
So it's kind of all over the board.
Wow. It just keeps growing. It's the more that we know, the one thing is leading to the other too. And we do say, and we know that everything is so interconnected. And this area of research, it just keeps peeling back more and more. And that's really the first conversation that you and I had was really a lot about sleep and its impact on food choices, weight, cravings. And so for our listeners, if you haven't listened to that, go back, listen. It was so much content. We turned it into a 2-parter, and, things that look at, the research of when we're sleep deprived, how does that influence not just our cravings, but even if we're doing everything we can to really white knuckle it, it's changing how our body's burning calories. It's changing all types of things that are really kind of stacking the deck against us. And so we've and not only when we are looking for craving more calories, more food, it's also the types of carbohydrates. So we've talked a lot about ultra processed foods. And of course, we know that those aren't good, but that's exactly what we're craving more of when we're sleep deprived.
Exactly.
So listening to those two, you'll hear a really deep dive because we don't want to skip over that. I feel like what we're going to be talking about today is sort of the extras on sleep. So I would kind of the supplements and what are kind of the fun things that people are talking about or the buzzy topics. But I want to make it super clear that we've got really deep dives for y'all to hear some of that. A lot of content that Dr. Hanlon's talked about with, how does sleep impact our glucose, our insulin sensitivity. And then we also have spent a lot of time talking about the sleep hygiene, as we love to call it, the basics of that, so that constant schedule, timing your exercise, the kind of developing that ritual before bedtime. So we cover a lot of that. Is there anything that you would say, just kind of a quick nutshell, that we want to make sure that is like a high level overview before we get into our fun Q&As that we got from our viewers and on social media?
I think just the big overarching message is that sleep is important. I think for many, many years, people hung their hat on the idea that they didn't need sleep or that they didn't need a lot of sleep. Sleep need is individual. So one person can only need 6 hours a night while another person might need 9 hours a night. So sleep need is individual. But I think that culturally we're changing into understanding that sleep is actually important. And it's an important process that needs to occur not only for our brain, but for our body. And that we shouldn't just be, sleeping with whatever time is left over in the day.
Prioritizing it. And I think when people are thinking of, especially weight loss, I think a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to watch what I'm eating, and sleep is not even in the consideration. And so knowing that it's that third element that holds equal importance to how we're nourishing our bodies through food, beverage, and also how we're moving our bodies, we want to look at sleep the same way. So
exactly.
We put this question out there on social media, and this was on my social pages. So it's and most of the questions that came through are from people who I know well, and some of them I know really well, and I know that sleep is a really big challenge for them. And this is why sometimes whenever we do podcasts, I already sort of know what the things are that we want to dive deep into. And in this one, though, I really wanted to hear from people that are struggling with this a lot, and what are the things that their questions, their challenges, what are they being marketed to with? And so a lot of times they're kind of trying to size up, is this really worth it or not? And so we'll just kind of go through the run through. And one of the very first questions I'd like us to start with is about cortisol. And so the question that came through on cortisol is a cortisol spike in those wee hours of the morning, like that 3:30 in the morning cortisol spike, is this really a thing? Is this happening to us? Like, maybe we're being told that it's happening. And if so, how do we manage it?
Right. So there's a natural 24-hour rhythm to cortisol. We refer to that as a circadian rhythm, circa diem, around 24 hours. So there's a natural 24-hour rhythm that happens for cortisol. And cortisol is usually highest in a normal, healthy individual around the time when you wake up in the morning. So it starts to rise overnight, and it's about highest when you wake up in the morning, and then it declines, across the day. And since cortisol is thought to be a stress hormone, the joke is kind of that, like, waking up every day is a stressful event for your body, because that's when cortisol is highest. So having a peak around 3:30, I think it depends on what time you normally go to bed and what time you normally wake up. It's certainly rising overnight. It's typically lowest around the evening, and then it starts to rise overnight and peaks around the time that you wake up in the morning. So when we are doing 24-hour sampling in individuals in the laboratory, so we take samples repeatedly from individuals over a 24-hour period at anywhere from 15 to 30-minute intervals. If the protocol for people sleeping in the laboratory calls for them to wake up at 5:30 in the morning, cortisol will be highest about 5:30 in the morning. That same individual, if the protocol requires them to wake up at about 7:30 in the morning, cortisol will be highest at about 7:30 in the morning. So it seems to be very sleep dependent, but there is also a circadian or a time of day impact of the cortisol rhythm. So it's highest in the morning, declines across the day. But other things that impact cortisol, of course, is stress, which, if you can limit your stress levels at certain times of day, or, de-stress the most in the morning when cortisol is already high. But just managing your stress levels. I know that caffeine and alcohol also can influence cortisol levels, specifically cortisol production. You don't want cortisol to be high late in the day. You want it to try to be low, like what it's supposed to be endogenously. If you don't get enough sleep, cortisol will end up being a little bit higher in the afternoons than it normally would be if you're getting sufficient sleep. And it's my understanding, I don't know a lot about it, but I also think that diet impacts cortisol levels. So specific foods can regulate cortisol appropriately.
So a couple of things on this. We think about cortisol as being a negative, with cortisol being a stress hormone. We think of cortisol, the association of high levels of cortisol, abdominal fat, belly fat, kind of the tie in there. And so I think it can be really easy to give it that categorical, we need to keep stress hormones low, cortisol low. What can I do to lower my cortisol levels? But what you're saying is by having our cortisol levels naturally the highest in the morning, is that's sort of the little oomph for the get up and go in the morning. So we don't.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So some people also think that cortisol, since there's cortisol receptors throughout your body, right? Your heart has receptors and different peripheral tissues. When we talk about that circadian rhythm, one of the things people think might be telling all the organs and just keeping everybody in line with what time of day it is cortisol. Since cortisol is seen by all the different organs, then that's one way also that all those different organs know what time of day it is. So if cortisol is high, but all your peripheral organs
get together, y'all. It's time.
Yeah, exactly. It's time to wake up. That's part of it, right? Like it's time to wake up, time to get this day going, time to get that heart pumping because we're going to be moving around a little bit more, the lungs going, we're going to eat some food. So stomach, get ready. So, it's all the cues for the day. I think we're going to talk about melatonin in a little bit, but melatonin is also another one of those cues that kind of tells the body what time of day it is. And, everybody get on the same page.
So with cortisol, the takeaway is that cortisol is not inherently bad. There's having the healthy levels of cortisol at certain times of the day. Now, what I wonder is the person who feels like they're having kind of that rush of, that surge of energy or adrenaline or heart racing at 3 a.m. as they're waking up. I wonder if some of it, could it be if they wake up and they start thinking about things that are causing them angst and their mind starts to get into overdrive. And so even though, let's say the people who intent is to wake up at 7:30, but if they wake up at 3, say just go to the bathroom, but then their mind starts going into these other places. Yeah. Is it possible that our body is then producing cortisol almost like it is time for that get up and go?
It's starting to increase anyway. And I would imagine that even just your thoughts and anxiety can lead to spikes in cortisol. I don't know that for sure, but I imagine that can be the case. A lot of times when people tell me about their sleep issues, right? They'll come and just when they know that I study sleep or, that I'm an expert in sleep and circadian rhythms, they'll come tell me about their sleep issues. Mm-hmm. And very often when I just, am listening to what they're saying, I'll say, that doesn't sound like an actual sleep issue per se, right? You don't have a problem with sleeping. You have a problem with thinking too much when you're supposed to be sleeping, which are two different things, right? So like, how can you quiet your mind to get some sleep? And not perseverate on all those thoughts like you tend to do at 3:30 in the morning. And why, like you all of a sudden have some mental clarity, because I know I do. At 3:30 in the morning, all of a sudden I've remembered something that was very important that I should have remembered during the day, but now I'm remembering it in the middle of the night and I have to think it through, right? And that's inhibiting me from sleeping, but it's not necessarily a sleep problem. It's, not being able to quiet my mind at that time of day.
And it would be almost impossible for the listener or us as the average individual to know the difference, I would imagine, of when I'm waking up in 3 a.m, is it a disruption of my circadian rhythm because my cortisol is spiking, or is it a stress-related wake up and my mind is going? Right. Or are there other things that might be an issue, like that light that's coming through, and turns on at that time of day?
Or the room is too warm, and so then now I'm awake. And since I'm awake, now I'm thinking about all of the things I need to do during the day. And then, I start getting stressed out about it. And so then I'm awake.
So the question of, does cortisol really spike kind of in those wee hours of the morning? Is it really a thing? The answer would be it's possible, but it's also really hard for us as individuals to know what's actually happening. So then I think kind of the next step is when we do have that, because, and I'll think, gosh, was I dreaming about that? Because like you said, there'll be a clarity, and then you think, I need to remember this. And then you can't get it out of your head. And you're like,
Right.
okay. And then it's like 3 things I need to remember. So my advice there is wake up and jot it down. And I sleep with my phone in the other room, which is something you and I've talked about on our other episodes, but not having your electronics by your bedside, if at all possible. And so having old fashioned pen and paper, pencil and paper, and write it, because it's going to release it from your head. And at that point, you're not having it swirling. And then for the other things that we were just talking about, light, temperature, all of these are going to be tune into those others. Now, what about any other type of, cognitive behavioral therapy? Like at what point would you say it could be beneficial for someone to say, I really need to seek help if they are kind of having that swirl and they're not able to turn it down, and it's really interfering every day?
Yeah. So there's different things to think about. One of the issues is that you have a problem falling asleep, right? So if you're doing all of the things, you're doing all the sleep hygiene things you're supposed to be doing, you have your bedtime routine, the room is comfortable, it's very dark, you're doing all of those things, but you still lay in bed and you can't fall asleep for 2 or 3 hours. That's a trouble falling asleep. I would say, if that continues, probably seek out someone to talk to help you work through some of that. Another problem people have is the problem staying asleep. So some people can fall asleep easily and then, habitually wake up at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and can be up for hours and then eventually fall asleep, but then they're still not getting enough sleep in the night, right? And so the kind of rule of thumb is if you are feeling too fatigued during the day, if you have daytime sleepiness that's interfering with your life, that's when you should probably seek someone out, right? So if you're too sleepy driving, if you're too sleepy, carrying on with your daytime activities, then you're definitely having an issue with sleep in the night that you should seek someone out to try to help you with that.
Let's talk about alcohol as well, and alcohol's influence on that 2, 3 o'clock in the morning wake up.
Yeah. So everybody always thinks that sleep or alcohol, puts you to sleep. Alcohol really messes up your sleep. It might put you to sleep, but it definitely doesn't keep you asleep. And there's different stages of sleep, and the amount of alcohol you drink can impact the various stages. It's not a sleep aid by any means.
So every year, we host the Alcohol Free for 40 Challenge, and we are doing all these, physical metrics, lab metrics on participants at the beginning and at the end of the 40 days that they're giving up alcohol. And some of the feedback, and we have a lot of interaction with them throughout the 6 weeks of this challenge. And the feedback is, you told me that I was going to be sleeping better, and I am laying wide awake for the first week. We're like, just stick with us, just trust us, and they're angry. Right. They're like, this is a hoax. You told me I was going to sleep better. But because they were so used to that alcohol having a sedative effect and falling asleep quickly, they're having to reacclimate their bodies to do it themselves. But what they also notice is that, hold on, now that I'm actually falling asleep, once they're a week, 2 weeks into this, they realize that they're staying asleep better, and they're not having that disruption where they're waking up 2, 3 in the morning wide awake as a result from alcohol. So while the alcohol helps,
and they wake up more refreshed and feeling like they actually got a good night of sleep, even if before they didn't realize they were waking up so many times in the night. Very often you wake up in the morning, or people wake up in the morning, and they don't even realize that they've woken up so much, or that they've had such disrupted sleep, right? And so when they wake up feeling so refreshed, that's kind of like another cue that like, oh, something was going on before.
Yes. And it's one of those, we do all these other measurements, but those are the ones that are like, they're so subtle, and we encourage people to pay attention to them. But there are several things that, with sleep trackers and all, you can really measure and get into, but there's also some of the subtle things that are really just paying attention. So on the topic of, some of the same things of, if someone says, okay, well, what can I change or what can I do differently? One big one we would say is reevaluate alcohol as it relates to your sleep patterns. And if you're drinking alcohol at all, and sometimes that might mean dialing it back. It may mean try it without. And when we're looking at other things that people are like, what could I put in? What could I take out? Talk to us about THC and CBD as it relates to sleep aids.
Right. So we've discussed before. So one of the main things that I study is the endocannabinoid system. So we make cannabinoids. You have an endogenous cannabinoid system. Your body makes these lipids that are very similar molecular structure to THC. So, and it works. The endocannabinoid system is involved in many aspects of physiology. I think of it in regards to food intake, but it's involved in inflammation, the immune system, cognition. It's involved in so many things. And so I study the endocannabinoid system, right? So like the rhythm of the endocannabinoid system, what happens if you don't get enough sleep to the endocannabinoid system. And what's so interesting is that people will say, well, what happens with exogenous cannabinoids? Like what happens when people use THC or use CBD? And we honestly, the research is still very new. So I know there is a meta-analysis, which is an analysis. A researcher will look at a bunch of different papers that have done a similar kind of research and kind of pool all the data from those to get a bigger picture. And I think there was a meta-analysis done that was done in like 2013, and it was included about 40 publications. And most of them were from the United States, which I also think is interesting. Most of those publications were from the United States. And they found that it was kind of all over the board, right? Like some people had improved sleep from using THC or CBD. Some people had worse sleep. And I think it was more people had worse sleep than better sleep. But then there was also other papers that showed there was mixed results, or there was other papers that showed there was no impact at all. And so it's kind of all over the place. I think in part because there's so many different strains and types of THC. There's so many different, CBD is, cannabidiol, but there's also different variations. Whether or not, these things called terpenes are included or not included. I think what also plays into the actual science and data that was coming out of these studies is whether or not the people being studied were considered habitual users, novices, but there hasn't been a ton of studies, randomized control trials showing that yes, if you use THC, your sleep will be better. Or yes, if you use THC, your sleep will be worse.
Okay.
We're still trying to figure all of that out. There's a lot of things I think that come into play. I do know that there was a paper out of Northwestern University here in Chicago. It is now 2005, so probably or 25. I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago that showed that a specific type of THC, a specific strain, was helpful in people with obstructive sleep apnea. Now that was a very specific disease state.
Yeah.
It was a very right. It was in a very specific group of people, and they studied a very specific strain. Right. So that's not going to be, something that is just, again, a generalizable thing that, THC helps people with OSA.
And anecdotally,
but in that particular study, it did.
Right. Anecdotally, the feedback, from a very small sample size of people who are sharing is, having tried things like CBD or THC, I think what they're passing along to me is that they've tried these and expected them to be beneficial and sort of took them thinking this is going to help. So there's some of that placebo effect. And, 3 months, 6 months in, there was other things that were sleep disruptors, and they said, okay, maybe I thought it was helping, but clearly something's not working now. And when they remove those, especially in the case of THC, the sleep markedly improved. And so again, very informal, anecdotal. This is just people telling me off the cuff, but who had a belief that the THC was helping them and then said, hold on. And then when they stopped, it said, wow, this is so much better now. And my sleep is better and my clarity is better when I'm waking up. So it's one of those things too, I think, before we're turning to something that is, again, sort of that crutch, are we doing some of the other basics? One that's pretty,
Right.
I would say like pretty mainstream and not nearly as I would think many other considerations to be aware of is something as simple as magnesium. Talk to us about that when it's magnesium as it relates to sleep. Like what does the science say as far as effectiveness? And if so, what type, how much?
So super interesting to me because I'm at a certain age where we're talking a lot about sleep and different supplements and, temperature in the room when you're sleeping and all of these things. And a lot of people have asked me about magnesium. And so, not even from scientific perspective, but just from like chatting
at
with
a
my
party,
friends
you're like the
kind of
most
thing.
popular person. Like,
Yeah.
oh, go talk to Erin. You're like, I don't. Right.
Yeah. 100%. Everybody. Well, like that's one thing that's cool about what I study is that everybody gets it. Like I study sleep. Everybody knows what sleep is. Everybody has a sleep thing to tell me.
Right.
But so lately we've been talking a lot about magnesium, and what I learned when I had to go look into it for everybody was that there really aren't any trials. Like, I think they're just starting. Magnesium is one of those things that's kind of like anecdotally people were saying to doctors and otherwise, I've been taking magnesium and it helps me. And so then it was like, oh, okay, maybe we need to look into this because I think the studies, the actual like scientific studies that have investigated the effect of actual magnesium on sleep, it's in people that have magnesium deficiency. So if you don't have magnesium deficiency, I don't know if it's beneficial or not because I don't know if the studies have been done. I don't think the studies have been done. I think magnesium has been shown scientifically to be beneficial in people with magnesium deficiency or people with insomnia. And people can have insomnia-like symptoms, but not actually be diagnosed with insomnia. So having insomnia and having insomnia-like symptoms, which is having a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep, are distinct. And I know that the science of magnesium has really only occurred in people with magnesium deficiency or with those clinically diagnosed with insomnia.
And when we look at the benefits of magnesium, there's, we look at it some with its impact on muscle relaxation. And if you think about
exactly
magnesium, calcium, sodium. Sodium's the main electrolyte that we lose with sweat. It's usually what's going to be involved in muscle cramping, but to some degree, things like magnesium and calcium also play a role. So taking magnesium at night could be beneficial, and it also helps with get GI regularity, we would say too. So there's other reasons that someone said we could take it, and for the most part, it's pretty benign if someone wants to just try it.
For sure. Those are definitely the things that are just like, oh yeah, I don't think it hurts to try, right? But like you said, exactly that. It's like, it might be helpful in relaxing muscles or the gut, and that in turn facilitates sleep.
Right.
But whether or not it's directly influencing sleep, I think is yet to be seen.
But not a bad thing for most people to add it in. And usually you would do a dosage of 500 milligrams, maybe even starting with 250 NC, but 250 to 500 milligrams. Talk to us about melatonin.
And I think the suggestion is to take it like an hour or two before bedtime. And that's the same thing with melatonin. Okay. You're not supposed to take it right before you go to bed. You're supposed to take it about an hour or 2 hours before you initiate sleep.
Okay, good point. And when should someone consider melatonin? When would they not? Like, I would always have
melatonin's
the fear
a tricky one.
Yeah. That's one that I feel like, CBD, THC to me are not to be taken lightly. Magnesium, I would say, yeah, if you want to try it, try it. Melatonin, I kind of put in that first category too.
Yeah. So I think people thought that melatonin is just for sleep, right? It's just the sleep drug. Or the sleep peptide, and that's all it does, but that isn't all it does. And so, on the whole, the suggestion, if you're taking melatonin to help with sleep, you take it an hour or two before bedtime. What's interesting about these over-the-counter, all melatonin's over the counter, but it's not FDA regulated, is there was a paper, and now I'm saying it was a couple years ago, but now it could be 5 years ago. I don't think it was that long ago, but there was a paper that came out some years ago that didn't tell us what the brands were, but they tested a bunch of different brands of melatonin, that you can just get at the pharmacy. And they found that some of them had way more melatonin in them than the label suggested, way less melatonin in them than the label suggested, or, exactly what it said it had. I know that in the laboratory, we use a specific brand because we know that it works. We can see it in blood when it shows up in people. So I know that this particular brand is the amount of melatonin that they say it is going to be. And it shows up physiologically in people's bloodstream, but that is not necessarily the case with everything that's on the market. Some things have way more than it's
marketed
saying
on the
it
label.
does, or nothing. Thank you.
Are
or
you
nothing at all.
Able to share what the brand is that y'all use?
I think it's fine. I mean, I don't. Yeah. So we in the laboratory use a brand called Life Extension.
Okay.
And it depends on, what kind of study you're doing. I know that some studies just use like the 5 milligram or 3 milligram, regular dose. There's also one that they have that's an immediate release and an extended release in the same capsule. So it's one of those ones that helps you fall asleep, but also keeps you asleep. Because some of the other melatonins, might get released, but then, drops down, gets metabolized very quickly, and then it's gone. So we use the IR/XR, immediate release, extended release, because the levels stay up for a long time. Now, that can also not be a great thing, and I will explain to you why. Melatonin is typically secreted when it's dark out. So the light cues from the world are taken in from your eyes, and they travel to a part of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus travels to, or tells other parts of your brain and your body, hey, it's either light out or it's dark out. And one of the places that the suprachiasmatic nucleus connects to say whether or not it's light out or dark out is this gland called the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is where melatonin is secreted. So only after those light cues are sent to the pineal gland does the pineal gland start to produce melatonin. So it only does it when it's dark. And the idea of that is, it's one of the cues that tells your body it's nighttime, just like cortisol is high, when you wake up in the morning, and it's telling your whole body, okay, let's get primed for the day. Let's get all those juices flowing and everything that we need to, get our body going. When melatonin is high, melatonin's telling all the receptors and all the organs in your body, okay, it's time to be quiet. We're sleeping. It's nighttime. It's dark out. It's time for the body to be at rest. And so one of the organs that receives this message is your pancreas. So melatonin actually inhibits insulin secretion. And so insulin, I think, as we've discussed before, is, one of the things that you need when you eat food to store or process food properly and store it or not store it as need be. And so if melatonin is high and it is inhibiting your pancreas from secreting insulin, that means that any food that you're eating when melatonin is high isn't getting dealt with at the level it should be, because not enough insulin is getting secreted. So if you're taking an over-the-counter melatonin that has 200 the amount of melatonin in it, then, says it's on the label, melatonin is still going to be super high at 10, or not even 10, but 8, 9 o'clock in the morning once you're up and having breakfast.
Right.
And so these are the things that we don't necessarily, or people don't necessarily know or just think about, that melatonin isn't just one of those ones that you can just I'll just haphazardly take it. It's not going to hurt. It's not doing anything. It does a lot more things besides tell your body it's time for sleep.
So it could, at best, or not even at best, but one negative could be it's leaving us groggy when we wake up, but it could also be inhibiting with how our body is processing or not able to process carbohydrates. It also is explaining, I had used a continuous glucose monitor, and I've shared on this podcast, and I can link back to that too, it was eye-opening to me that at night, having even just 15 grams of carbs, the equivalent of what's in like a slice of bread, having just 15 grams of carbs from a very defined snack. And my glucose was about 140 for about 6 hours overnight. And I was stunned because my glucose levels are typically hovering around 100 through the day. And part of it I knew was I wasn't having that movement. My muscles weren't working or processing that carbohydrate. I did not have the connection of that melatonin inhibiting the insulin secretion. And because the snack that I had would be 10 o'clock at night, small, but I love kind of, there's a emotional security blanket of having that little nighttime snack. And so I realized, wow, I need to not have that carbohydrate at night, which decades of being a dietitian, I would have told someone that same snack was insignificant. It doesn't even matter. But then I looked at that and said, wow. And the other, as you talked about with the light and the cues, I had mentioned to you that we went to Alaska, and when it was barely even dusk, and that was as dark as it got for only a couple of hours, and it would still be, it felt like at midnight, it would feel like it would feel more maybe like at 5 p.m. And it was stunning how you did not feel tired. And I thought we were there for 8 days, 9 days. And you would think that the lack of, not having as much sleep as usual would catch up with us. And it didn't. It was really strange. And fortunately, we were not there during the dark hours of the winter, but I would think all of that would be a really hard thing to flip back and forth. So some of our takeaways are: use caution if it is something like melatonin. If someone is interested in trying that, would you say extended release, immediate release, or talk with a provider, talk with a pharmacist to see?
I would talk with a pharmacist to see, but you can always just start with the immediate release. And then if you're finding that it's helping you get to sleep, but not keeping you asleep, then maybe try the immediate release, the extended release. I would also say that, anything that you use, you should be using in moderation. I don't think any of these things are long-term fixes.
Right. And when we talk about good sleep hygiene, setting up a pattern, setting up kind of a ritual at night that is cueing your body that it's time to shut things down, turning off those electronics, getting those screens down, putting your phone, sleeping with your phone in a different space so that's not the last thing that we're scrolling. Something I love is the idea of, would you wake up early to do what you're staying up late to do? And probably not. You're not going to set your alarm 90 minutes early to just scroll. And so again, tune in. We'll link to those other episodes that Dr. Hanlon and I really went through some of those deeper steps, because those are our core fundamentals: is develop these healthy habits around sleep, keep that room dark, keep that cool, get your electronics away, watch your alcohol consumption close to bedtime or even at all. Watch your caffeine consumption. For some people that might be not after 12 o'clock. Some people it might not be, after 2 or 3. What does that caffeine cutoff need to be? And then if you are one of those that's waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning, instead of maybe thinking, oh my gosh, is this my cortisol? We probably aren't going to answer that question individually, at least not with what we have the technology available to us now. But if you are waking up and you do have those things turning over, write it down, release it from you. And then like Dr. Hanlon said, if you are finding that your sleep, whether it's falling asleep or waking up in those wee hours, is interfering with quality of life, at some point, it is recommended that seeking out that cognitive behavioral therapy to help with training your body for better sleep, so that we can really, set ourselves up for success for all the other things that sleep is impacting in our bodies. Any last things that you want to have as a takeaway for folks?
I'm trying to think. No, I think we covered it. I just encourage everybody to think of sleep as an important aspect of maintaining good health.
Just right up there with daily movement and nourishing our bodies, putting healthy food in our bodies, putting sleep as that priority, and making it a priority versus the afterthought with what's left with the time that you've got. And then I would be one of those people, if I'm seeing you at a party, I would be talking your ear off about sleep and sleep stories and everything else. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, well, I love to talk about sleep and circadian rhythms, so we would just tuck ourselves into a corner and chat away.
I love it. Thanks for your time. And I know that we'll be doing another one at some point soon, so I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, sweet. Well, have a great night. And again, thank you so much for your time.
For sure. Okay. Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
A tremendous thank you to Dr. Hanlon for spending so much time and sharing her expertise with us. I have a blast listening to her share the science in a way that is so entertaining, fun to listen to, approachable, accessible. So I really love any conversation that we have and all things sleep. So, she and I were just recapping the basics, and I want to just really encourage you, especially if you're considering a supplement, first make sure that you've got the fundamentals there as best you can. It's not always going to be possible. There's going to be some things that kind of feel outside of our reach. But when we're talking about, just like if we're looking at nutrition and supplementation for other aspects of our diet or our lifestyle, if we're looking at, say, performance and athletic performance, if we're eating just a terrible quality diet, does it really matter what extra supplements we're adding? So let's first look and make sure we've got the foundation, we've got the basics as best we can in place. And so when it comes to sleep, it's going to be trying to get somewhat of a consistent schedule. Of course, things change all the time, day to day. I know personally with me, sometimes, bed may be closer to 10 p.m. Sometimes it's closer to midnight. Sometimes it might be later than that. And so I know that it does vary a lot day by day with our different lifestyles that we have. But as much as possible, trying to set a consistent routine. If someone is a shift worker or you've got just kind of a weird, erratic pattern of work, sometimes those are going to flip-flop. And you may have, I think about Kerrigan and the morning crew at WGNO. They're waking up. She's waking up at 1:30 in the morning to be at work, for 2:30 or whatever the wee hours of the morning are. So, but at best, even within those 5 days that are the work days that are maybe going to be shift work, still trying to keep some consistency there. And unfortunately, it might really swing heavily on those off days. So shift workers I know that's just such a hard schedule. Nurses, shift workers, people who have those erratic schedules. But as best we can, maintaining at least a little bit of consistency in the timing of when we're going to bed, when we're waking up. The other things though, timing might be one of the harder things in some cases to control. The things that trying our best to keep that room really dark. If it's not possible to have it blacked out, then having a sleep mask, having a good sleep mask, something that's going to block out that light. Just as we were ending today's conversation, you heard the description and really how Dr. Hanlon is explaining how that darkness really invites our bodies to sleep, and that lightness is really stimulating the awakeness and that alertness. And so as much as possible, if you're not able to control the light in the room, something like a sleep mask can help with that timing of the light. Thinking about what your routine is before bed, getting those electronics out of our hands, having something that is a replacement for that. It could be a book. It could be something that you've got that is, and for me personally, I have I have 5 books by the bed, and I might only get 3 pages in because that real book, without the light of the phone, that real book, it actually helps me become more sleepy, and then put it down. And I'm not having that light of my phone as that stimulation. So really thinking through what are these things that we're adding in. And again, those other episodes that we've talked about before, parts 1 and 2 are just really so much of the fundamentals of it. And then the one on sleep science through the ages has just so much useful information of strategies and such on sleep hygiene. So making sure you've got that core foundation, cannot emphasize that enough. And then if you're looking at supplements, I would say the first one I would look at might be magnesium. And then there's others that we talk about in some of the episodes that can help us, even if it's maybe even a little bit more the placebo effect, but kind of can contribute to that ritual. But things like lavender and such that we can add in. So all the links that we're talking about are in the show notes of this podcast episode, all those earlier episodes. And send us any questions that you've got. If you've got follow-up questions, we'll ask Dr. Hanlon to join us for another episode on there. And if this episode helped you, please let me know. I always want to hear about it, and also share it with a friend and leave a quick rating or review. So thank you for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.